So let's talk about this messy middle of Bitcoin and personal finance. So typically, if you're into Bitcoin, you've heard about it, you get it on some level. Maybe you bought some Bitcoin on an exchange, and you start, kind of dollar cost averaging in it. Maybe you're like buying it once a month or once a week or a day, in small amounts. And maybe you've even gotten to a place where you bought a hardware wallet and you're doing self-custody, and you're looking to, even level that up and, start running a full node. So you get it, right? And ultimately that's a really great place to be, because you recognize that Bitcoin is better money. Bitcoin is this sort of high yield savings account for the long term. That's great. But then you kind of get to this point, and I think more people are talking about this. Brian Harrington's talking about this over on his channel a lot. Definitely definitely recommend that you follow him. But it's like, okay, so what do I do? Because I think a lot of the standard narrative around Bitcoin is more toward this, it's better money and the Fed, all of sort of like the libertarian, talking points around it. So I'm in this process, sort of doing this in front of you guys, of trying to figure out, okay, how do I go from being an enthusiast, which I have been for more than a decade now, to pragmatist. So how do I go from being a Bitcoin enthusiast to being a Bitcoin pragmatist? And how do I start integrating it into my, personal life? Now, my wife and I have been working on this in earnest for a while now, because, I wouldn't say that we're completely financially independent, but we have a modicum of financial independence. And there is, a Bitcoin savings account, if you will, that we've saved in consistently over the course of that time. It's not a huge amount. It's not life-changing money by any stretch of the imagination, because I've had to really work on my own conviction over the years. Even as early as I got into it, I wasn't convinced of it, and I was also in a bunch of other garbage coins, just to try to see who was going to be the fastest horse in the race. Just like, I've made all the mistakes that most new Bitcoiners make. Part of this, part of this exercise, part of this thing that I think a lot of us are really trying to lean into and kind of live into is, moving from this place where, Bitcoin is our hope, financially speaking, for the future. But how do we, is there a way that we can kind of integrate it into our personal finances, like on a daily basis, where we can start using all these exercises of trying to price things in Bitcoin versus pricing things in US dollars? Now, my wife and I have been doing this for a couple of years, and it's something that's really easy to fall out of. I'm not saying that I have this down, even though I've been a financial coach for 17 plus years, and I've helped, dozens of, probably hundreds of people at this point, get their arms around their money and, get out of debt, start investing. But Bitcoin has always been a stumbling block for me in that process, because even with some of my, most trusted situation where I'm their most trusted advisor, with my private clients, it's just always awkward to bring up Bitcoin and start talking about Bitcoin. And so I think that we're in an era now, which is great, that Bitcoin is more mainstream. You've got the ETFs, you've got strategy, you've got nation state adoption, you've got nation state mining, and there are massive pools of capital coming into the space, and it's a legitimate asset class. I think the thing that's challenging about that is that the main narrative is around this whole store of value. But Bitcoin is actually money. And if you go back and you look at the white paper, it's Satoshi Nakamoto talked about, it's peer-to-peer electronic cash. It was meant to be a payment system between individuals. So it's really supposed to be the people's money. So I think that we're getting there. I see things like, mentioned this in a couple of videos. Yeah, Steak and Shake is now accepting Bitcoin. Square, Jack Dorsey's company, is getting ready to integrate it into payments. There are lots of different, companies and organizations that are starting to accept Bitcoin. So there are two areas, and I've talked a lot about this lately. There are two ways that my wife and I are trying to integrate Bitcoin into our lives. One is the Fold card. I've talked about that ad nauseum. I think the Fold card, which is basically like, it's kind of like a prepaid debit card, but the way that I see it is that it's the closest thing to a Bitcoin checking account that exists right now. So with the Fold card, you have an account number, and a routing number. And it is amazing to see all of the things that you're able to do. So you can have a cash balance. You can also have a Bitcoin balance inside the app that you use that interfaces with the card itself. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin for US dollars. It is really, like I said, it's really like it's becoming sort of the Bitcoin checking account. So I think that if this is something that, if you're an OG Bitcoiner and you're like, man, I really, yes, it's great. HODL stack, keep stacking sats, stay humble, stack sats, all the cliches that we talk about. Great, but I think that, moving into this space where we're actually starting to reprice everything and really think about our personal finances in terms of Bitcoin, I think this is a great tool for that. I've also mentioned in other videos, and I've got a video coming out. Actually, I probably would have already released it at this point, but it talks about how to stack free sats using the cold card as well as the Gemini card in tandem with one another. And I go into great detail, actually in one of my private coaching session with one of my private clients where, onboarding her, into Bitcoin. She's been in Bitcoin for probably over a year now, stacking sats. She's got an exchange account. She's got a fold card. She just got the Gemini card as well. So, just really walking through that. The other piece of this is Bitcoin, like passive income. So I've been kind of, I guess in some ways, de-Bitcoinering myself in some ways, because the Bitcoin community can actually become kind of toxic in some ways, because there is a real kind of strict, narrow mindset. And I think that's a huge impediment for a lot of us. I mean, because at the end of the day, we still live in a fiat world. And I think it's really exceedingly difficult to kind of think through, all right, well, how do I take this high yield savings account, and I'm not trying to use it all, but I would like to start peeling off some of that to live my life today, which is precisely where my wife and I are. I mean, I would say that I'm sort of like semi-early retired. I do take on projects. I would take on a job. I'm actively looking for, W-2 employment, more from the perspective of like, okay, what could I go contribute? Could this be a Bitcoin company? Could this be a finance company? What can I do to continue to try to bring personal finance and the FIRE movement and the Bitcoin ecosystem together to get as many people on this platform? I published a video a couple of days ago, a presentation that I saw by David Bailey, who's I think the chief marketing officer of Azteco, which is a company that produces vouchers. They're trying to do a really great job of making Bitcoin more accessible. And one of the things that he talks about in this presentation that I think thematically is just great for us to kind of continue to riff on is that the next 100 million users of Bitcoin are not going to be like the first 15% that are really the early adopters. The next phase, which he calls, which I think is called in the marketing sphere, which is called the early majority, they don't care about all the things that the standard totally sold out Bitcoiner, typically libertarian, principles, they don't care about that. They care about the utility. They care about, taking advantage of the number go up. So a second instrument that we're using right now, we do have some assets that are trapped in the legacy financial system in terms of 401k. Well, it's a rollover IRA as well as an HSA, and then we also have a taxable brokerage account. And so I got this idea. I got another one from Brian Harrington, and I started going down the rabbit hole of these. We obviously own some IBIT, which is the BlackRock ETF, but I also wanted to start exploring and experimenting with this covered call ETF called BTCI, which is by, the name is NEOS. And last month, I kind of dipped my toe into that using our taxable brokerage account, our rollover IRA, as well as our HSA. And I think I was only in it for maybe a week and a half, and I got the full dividend. Actually, I don't think it's called a dividend. I think it's called a distribution. So it's just amazing because all of a sudden we had $890 worth of Bitcoin income. Plus with that ETF, you're really also taking advantage of the rise of in value of Bitcoin. So the net asset value continues to rise with with right in parallel with Bitcoin, but you're also getting monthly income off of that. So that's a way for us to really, have our cake and eat it too, if you will. So I think the next thing, I think what we're in the process of, and I'm interested in hearing, what you guys think about this, is to start going through, some of the more meta items, like, looking at home prices, repricing those, reframing those from a dollar unit of account to a Bitcoin unit of account. It's really encouraging because while people that are not in Bitcoin are the U.S. dollar, which is an inferior currency, is being devalued, being debased on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I think the U.S. is adding, I think, $1 trillion to the national debt it was 90 days. I think it's like 70 days now. So every ounce of value that I can hold outside of that unit account in Bitcoin over the course of the next 5 to 10 years and even the last 5 years, I can look at things like, okay, the median house value in this neighborhood, which, by the way, this is not our house. We're pet sitting for another friend right now. Is that, you can take a look at that. Like, I've seen this example many times, and I'll probably put together a little presentation about this, but a house that was a $500,000 house in 2020, 5 years hence is now $1 million home. But if you price that in Bitcoin, that was something like 70 Bitcoin back in 2020, and now it's fewer than 20. I'm not doing the math right. So this is really just, I think just kind of another link in the conversation of how I'm wrestling through, even as a financial coach. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert finance guy. I'm not a financial advisor. None of this is, financial advice, all the standard, disclaimers. I'm just a guy that, paid off $174,000 worth of debt in 2.5 years, about 20 years ago now, 18 years ago now, and really have figured out the basic blocking and tackling of personal finance. I've led a bunch of people through the basic blocking and tackling. And so this next sort of phase that I think most of us are working through right now is, how do I do this with Bitcoin? Like, how do I incorporate Bitcoin into personal finance if I'm pursuing FIRE? How is that going to help me get there more quickly? And then how can I peel off some of that? So I hope this is helpful. See you in the next video.